Last year, Sengun was 602 out of 609.
You wanted to talk about the evolution of Alperen Sengun in this his third season.
I did, and Sengun, we wondered about what his role was going to be. They added significant talent around him, both bringing in a point guard in Fred VanVleet, but then the overall roster construction and some real improvement from guys like Jabari and Jalen Green had some improvement, but I'm not going to go overboard there. And there are some really interesting things that I wanted to. I'm doing a mix of like Seth stats and synergy that stood out to me. So, and of course, obviously watching a lot of Rockets basketball. Top line numbers for Sengun on the year: 21 points, 9 rebounds, 5 assists in about 32.5 minutes per game. His individual scoring efficiency is percentage-wise the same as last year, but as we talked about with Pascal Siakam, doing that, so 59% true shooting on 21 usage and 59% true shooting on 27 usage, which is what he's doing this year, are dramatically different because as you slide that far in usage, the quality of shots that you're getting pretty much has to be worse because you just can't ramp up that much and just
I do think there's
dunks.
a little bit of an exception to that, which we can get to, but I think generally that is certainly true and probably mostly true in his case. But I did want to hit on that a little bit as we continue here.
And looking at it in terms of Seth's total usage, it's striking because we wondered, okay, you're bringing in VanVleet, you're also bringing in a new head coach, Ime Udoka. What is his role in the offense going to be? And so one of the things that stands out is Alperen Sengun's total usage is very similar to Sabonis. However, and those players have been compared kind of how you would utilize them. Sengun's increase in overall role is coming almost entirely as a scorer. His playmaking percentage went up from 10 to 11.5, which is sizable relative to, centers. But going from a little bit under 18% scoring usage to 24 is a much larger change. The average center has 16.5 scoring usage and 6% playmaking, and so he's at 24 and 11.5 right now. So that's really big. And then something else, just kind of, so on the offensive role, so like basically what Sengun is doing more now is he's playmaking a little bit more, but he's scoring a lot more and doing so just as efficiently as he was before. And one of the other things that I was looking at, and I have Seth's rim protection numbers, so originally I was really interested in block percentage. Sengun stuck out to us, when model projections and from Europe and everything else. Really high block rate, 4% block rate his rookie year. Then second year that dropped to 3.2. Now this year it's 2.1. And that is not, from my perspective, a circumstance where Sengun is, all of a sudden he's Bam Adebayo and he's out there on the floor all the time. He's just blocking fewer shots. That doesn't necessarily mean like he's a bad defender or the defense is bad or anything like that. We brought up that they're fifth overall and how that's a feather in Ime Udoka's cap. But Sengun being like a much better rim protector than Domantas Sabonis, which was a part of my theory of why I thought Sengun was so much could be so much better, that hasn't really borne itself out.
Yeah, I do still feel like I see more from him.
Agreed.
And maybe I was focused more on that early on this season, but I do think he just kind of gets his chest in there a little bit more. He's a little more explosive vertically. He's also just, I think, done a much better job of just stepping up earlier in the possession before the ball gets all the way at the rim to deny penetration. I mean, they are the number 5 defense, right? And, I'd be very surprised if Domantas Sabonis ever plays on the number 5 defense, despite the fact that this Rockets team has a lot of talent around him. I think this is, certainly to say that he's like a positive in and of himself is probably going too far, but he's also not killing them. I think that's pretty important. I talked about that exception that I had of like that you're taking harder shots generally if you're taking more shots, and Sengun increasing the percentage of possessions that he's using as a scorer and turnover guy from 20 to about 26%, which is obviously very high for a center. If you look at his synergy play types, though, last year, and remember, this is a piece of a much smaller pie, 21% of his possessions came as the pick and roll man. And he was actually below average in that at 1.1 points per possession. And this year, again, in a larger pie, 26% of a larger pie versus 21% of a smaller pie coming as a pick and roll man. And not a ton of that is, getting an alley-oop for a layup right around the basket. But I think having Fred VanVleet, if you compare that to Kevin Porter Jr., Jalen Green as the primary ball handlers last year, or, throw in your Daishin Nix or Ty Washington, plenty for that as well. His synergy with VanVleet, like really having someone who can set him up on the move. I mean, this is not, James Harden, Joel Embiid, but similarly, just to get him the ball on the move in a place where he can do something with it, facing the basket without a guy directly in front of him, or where he can just duck in quickly against a switch or just have a temporary advantage to get the ball. Like, that's been so massive to me. To me, the fact that he's posting up about actually fewer of his overall possessions. But, last year he had 230 pick and roll man possessions. This year he's already at 293. That's massive to me. And I think one of the things that Udoka has struggled with is VanVleet and Alperen Sengun, much like Steve Nash and Amari Stoudemire, they didn't used to stagger those guys with the Suns. Those guys work together really well. But then, all right, if you also need to get through the game for 48 minutes. So do you keep those guys together? Or do you stagger them just so that you have like someone to run the offense through, because they just don't really have a backup point guard?
The direct parallel for me was Kerr separating Draymond Green and Steph Curry more last year because Jordan Poole couldn't do it.
Right. Yeah, and now do they try to run more through Amen Thompson, who is just dunking everything in sight, but hasn't really been... I mean, the number, like, this guy, he's getting like 6 dunks a game and some.
It's incredible.
It's insane.
But a couple other quick things on Sengun. EPM, again, not gospel. Positive and more positive on Sengun's defense this year than last year. Negative 0.6 defensive EPM last year. That's up to plus 0.4. That improvement is actually higher than his offensive improvement, and that's a part of why Sengun, in EPM went from a plus 1 last year to a plus 2.8 this year, which is very, very good. And we got Seth's rim protection numbers, and Sengun, it's a fascination. At some point I may want to have an extended conversation with him, which probably won't be on a podcast about this. I thought it was super low on Sengun this year. Number 497 out of 574 players. He's near Cody Zeller, Wendell Carter, and Onyeka Okongwu. So they're different. I have different levels of respect for different guys in there as rim protectors. Sengun's contest rate of 40% is higher than Zubac's and Gobert. Gobert's role can be a little bit different there, but opponents are making 62% of the shots that he contests around the rim, and 62% overall in the restricted area when Sengun is in the game. So I'm like, oh man, what was that last year? Last year, Sengun was 602 out of 609. He was above, only above a couple of guys. I think Vooch was one of those. So I want to keep an eye on that. That's something I want to look into, both when I watch the Rockets and kind of getting into the meat of the stats later on.